1.2 Developments in Dar al-Islam. So after the death of Muhammad, Islam was spreading fast and far and wide. A huge overarching theme for 1200 to 1450. Many Islamic leaders showed a lot of religious tolerance, and the Islamic community did a lot to transfer knowledge throughout Afro-Eurasia. In the Abbasid Empire, scholars traveled very far to get to the House of Wisdom, which was this place of learning and education. So we're focusing a lot on the Abbasid Empire here because it was an Islamic empire and it's where the House of Wisdom was. And for geographical purposes, this is in the Middle East. It's also sometimes known as the Abbasid Caliphate, I think. Anyways, they ran into some conflict with other groups. For example, the Egyptian Mamluks. So Mamluks were purchased enslaved people who were mostly used for soldiers, and because of this, they had a relatively high amount of opportunity for advancement. So eventually, in Egypt, the Mamluks took control of the government, and they became the Mamluk Sultanate. They traded mostly in cotton and sugar. Then we have Seljuk Turks. They were also Muslims, and their leader was considered a sultan. The Seljuk Turks then limited the travel of Christians to and from their holy site. The Abbasids had previously allowed them to travel easily. So, in turn, European Christians gathered groups of soldiers that became known as the Crusaders. And their goal was to reopen access to their holy sites. Then the Mongols, I'm excited to get to their little topic later on, they also fought the Abbasids and Seljuks and were eventually stopped only by the Egyptian Mamluks. A key thing about the Abbasids was they had this city called Baghdad, and this was just a city that held importance to trade and, for example, that education with House of Wisdom. But as trade patterns shifted, it kind of slowly lost its importance. Cultural and social life. So the Abbasid Caliphate was led by Arabs and Persians, but the other later Islamic states were mostly shaped by those from Central Asia, by Turkic peoples. Still, a cultural region was formed and sprayed trade ideas and goods. And they all had similar legal systems through the use of the Sharia, which was this religious law. And then there were universities in these areas, so there's an example for education. And then Islamic scholars did a bunch of stuff. They translated all these Greek works into Arabic so that those ideas persisted of Aristotle. They transferred the knowledge of math from India to Europe. They got their paper making from China, and then that spread to Europe. And then there are some specific people we want to look out for. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi. He was an Islamic scholar, and he dealt with astronomy, law, logic, ethics, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine. There was an observatory built under his instruction, and that was super advanced. Laid the groundwork for trigonometry. Then there was this Sufi poet and mystic. Her name was Aisha al-Bayuniya, and she was this female Muslim writer. And her poetry shows this contrast between Muslims and Sufis. So Sufis emphasized introspection to understand things versus Muslims who focused on the study of the Quran. Now Sufi missionaries, they actually played a great role in spreading Islam because in converting people and traveling as missionaries, they would often adapt to the culture there, which won over a lot of people. Islamic society also highly valued merchants. So it also spread through trade and stuff over the Indian Ocean and the Silk Road. That is religion, goods, ideas, etc. So Islam prohibited enslaving monotheists, so other Muslims, Jews, Christians, but it did allow the enslavement of others. So enslaved people from Africa were often imported. Enslaved women, though, had more freedom in the sense that they had more independence than legal wives if they were concubines, which they often were. And so they had opportunities to earn money, which sometimes allowed them to buy their freedom. Okay, so now more on free women in Islam. That's the next section. Most women wore the hijab, and they were allowed to study and read, though not in the presence of men unrelated to them. Men also wore head coverings. Some of Muhammad's policies were that these like dowries be paid to the future wife rather than her father. There could be no female infanticide, which is like killing newborn girls. And his first wife was educated and owned her own business, which set this like example of recognition of women having such abilities. And in relation to Christian or Jewish women, Islamic women kind of had a higher status. They could inherit property and keep that ownership after marriage. They could remarry if they were widowed, and sometimes they could even initiate a divorce. Now, Islamic rule in Spain. So basically, Muslim forces were able to get into Spain from like the south through like North Africa, kind of, and they decided that Cordoba would be their capital. Anyway, 732, Islamic military turned back when it lost the Battle of Tours. This like marked a limit for a sort of like rapid Islamic expansion into Western Europe, so most of the continent itself remained Christian, but Muslims ruled over Spain for the next 7 centuries, it says. And the Umayyad rulers there had a lot of toleration, religious tolerance. So here there were Muslims, Christians, and Jews like peacefully coexisting. It promoted trade as well, like Spain, and it became a center of learning, and it was like the like Islamic state in Spain was known as Al-Andalus. There was like a huge library there. There were like tons of scholars and intellectuals transfer. And so these Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars were all influencing each other. So like this Islamic scholarship ended up laying the groundwork for the scientific revolution and like the Renaissance in Europe. That was everything. I was going off like directly from here, but there are a few notes from my notes from, like over a year ago that has a few things I want to touch on, or think it would be like helpful to know to contextualize all of that. So there were like 2 types of Islam, and that was like Sunni and Shia. So especially in like next time periods that comes into a play with conflict, but that could also be an example for some sort of conflict you might see in like a multiple choice question. Mosques are an example of architecture. One of the 5 pillars of Islam is Hajj, and that's the pilgrimage to Mecca. So like the control of that is very important for any sort of like Muslim state, and like having access to that. Ibn Rushd was a scholar in Spain. His name's not bolded, but it is talked about a little bit in the book, so thank you for watching. I hope this helped. I have other videos just like this. You should go check them out.